Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today, the costume gives away a little bit about what we're talking about. It's a slight move away from the pure fintech chat we've been talking about. We are going to be talking about high performance cultures, high performance teams from one of the great experts on it. He is a great friend, a great author of one of my favorite ever books, Legacy. It is Mr. James Kerr. James, how are you?
Yeah, good. Good to see you again, Toby. Nice to be here.
Oh, listen, it's great to see you. Even if it isn't in person, the virtual James Kerr is almost as good. Almost as good. Listen, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom today. We've done a lot of work, as you know, throughout this COVID period, talking about how firms are adapting and pivoting through the crisis. I think it's really important that one of the key anchors of this is culture, and who better to talk about culture than one of the great experts of the world. You've spent the last few years traveling the world, from New Zealand and Australia all the way across to America and everywhere in between, talking about the sort of high performance cultures of the All Blacks, and that's then taken in lessons from military and sport and business. You've got a great stellar track record, one of the great storytellers out there. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen and actually, before we go into that, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background and anything I've missed in between that.
Well, no, that's pretty good. I mean, you know, in terms of my sweet spot, if you like, is high performance cultures. How leaders can create a high performance environment, and what the core principles are kind of beneath it. You know, I obviously wrote a book about a sports team, but sports analogies are kind of quite lame, really. You know, if we all pull together, the boat will go faster kind of stuff. Yeah, well, great. But underneath the high performance in any domain, there are some core principles. There are the sort of fundamentals, and I'm really interested in the transferable principles. You know, what does, say, SEAL Team 6 have in common with the All Blacks? Have in common with a Formula One team, have in common with a Premiership football team, have in common with a C-suite of a Fortune 500 company. You know, what makes teams tick? And so I've had a very blessed time taking a look under the cover of a lot of some of those teams and many more, in terms of, and asking those kind of questions that everyone really wants to know. How do you do it? You know, what are the beliefs and behaviors around continued high performance?
And high performance in this sort of environment becomes ever more tough, right? Or high results certainly, but performance can sort of can weather on. What are some of the things that you've seen from that, and how the best teams, the best companies are dealing with what we're dealing with at the moment?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you know, I guess the question is, how do you create a kind of a real team in a virtual world or a socially distanced world, a more connected to, you know, one of the key factors in success in high performance in sport, you know, in the military and in business, is cohesion. You know, one team, one cause, one sort of something to contribute to, and all the heightened levels of commitment and discretionary behavior and so on. If you are able to create that cohesion, and of course, cohesion is one of the issues that we're all facing. You know, I'm at home, you're at home. Many of the people listening will be at home or in stripped down offices where they're sitting apart from each other. No one can hug, you know, no handshakes. All of that connective tissue that normally holds a team together is absent now. So, you know, so some of the questions are, you know, how do you create that? How do leaders recreate that? How do they reboot their team and re-galvanize to take on which are, you know, some pretty considerable challenges? You know, my way of looking at it is sort of, it's sort of an unscientific process, if you like, is what I've kind of called reboot. And there are a number of factors. You know, there's reevaluation. You know, we're in a time of huge reevaluation now. You know, many of us are reevaluating our lifestyle choices. Do we need all of those shiny toys anymore? Do we want to fly to far off locations to go on holiday or to work? Do we want to spend hours in a plane with people? You know, all of those, you know, I think we've been thrown back in this sort of great pause that we've been in on what really matters, what we stand for, what we don't. And that's a really good clue. I'll go through some of the other words in a moment, but we start on reevaluation. I think, and the conversations I've been having out there, it's this is the time to have those values conversations, because it's very, very easy for individuals, leaders, and organizations and teams to kind of just chase the low-hanging fruit, for want of a better cliche, to react, to just do something. And abandon some of those core principles, some of those core values that have got you there in the first place. But actually, in a very swiftly changing world, having something solid to fall back on, sort of benchmarks for behavior, a core kind of ethos is incredibly important, more important than ever. So, one of the things I've been encouraging my clients to do is really to go, listen, have those values conversations. Talk about, excellence. Talk about execution. Talk about esprit de corps, if we talk about the Harrington Starr set of values. And you go, well, what does esprit de corps mean now, in a disparate world? What is excellence? What really is excellence now? And how do we execute? For instance. And so really using sort of a decision framework as a guide rails for sort of this next, both tactical and strategic decisions becomes incredibly important.
Yeah, I think this is incredibly interesting for me. I mean, we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I think one of the core principles that we've looked at is through this period, we've never been closer again to our purpose and our values. And people won't know this, but about 4 or 5 years ago, we worked together about defining the mission statement, the purpose, and the values of Harrington Starr. Your success, our business, was your creation. Excellence, execution, esprit de corps. Our values were stuff that we workshopped and created. And I think going back to that core purpose of a growth business, of growing teams and growing networks and growing careers, are all things that have become incredibly important. You kind of go through your values and purpose and mission and have it there in the background. And I think something that's been very, very clear to me is that's been thrust right to the very forefront of everything during this sort of period. And I think that anchor has been really, really important. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen that working for businesses. Yeah,
well, I mean, there's a phrase in sport, success is a terrible teacher. When things are good, you just get on with stuff, and some of the fundamentals actually get neglected quite often in those times. When the tide goes out and you're left there sort of stripped naked, you gotta have, the fundamentals become more and more important. And, one of the things that sets the great teams off is that focus on the fundamentals, do the basics brilliantly. And that comes down to the substructure beneath the basics, our values is and you talked about purpose. If I go through the R's, there's a sort of a reevaluate, reimagine, or re-envision. What does the future look like now? It probably doesn't look quite the same as it did 6 months ago. All of that ambition or this or that is different. So you need to go, well, how do I see the future? An interesting aside about seeing is, it's the word for idea. The original Greek, the word idea means to see. So how do we re-envision? How do we see ourselves in 6 months' time, in a year's time, and in 5 years' time? Because it's a different vision now, I think, for most individuals, particularly individuals, actually, but organizations, in terms of the way we do things around here. And then the next really is around repurpose. And as you say, if the power of purpose is, it's kind of like it should be like the Starship Enterprise. You build it now, but it's going to take you into galaxies that you don't even know exist. And you want to build a fine, sturdy ship. And if you know, for instance, with, if we use the Harrington Starr example, that the success of your clients builds your business. You're a growth company. If you grow your client success, good stuff will follow. And you go, well, that's pretty easy, right? That's a pretty clear set of guidelines in itself to be able to go, listen, times are tough, we're going to tough them out. Where can we really add value to our clients, where we can really help them do the right thing? And if you're just focused on that, your business will take care of itself. And I think one of the issues of stress makes, as individuals and as organizations, makes people selfish. We retreat, we get defensive, we fight or flight, we grab the scarce resources. That's an instinct, a human instinct. But of course, purpose is about not what we get, it's about what we give, what we can contribute. And that's the basis of good business, creating value from values, you create value, and then you build value from the value you create. That is the value chain in many ways, or a value chain. And so having a clear set of values, who we are, a vision of kind of how we're going to do things, where we're going, and a reason why, a sort of pumping, stirring, compelling reason why that really makes a difference. If you can answer that kind of holy trinity, kind of cultural holy trinity, you're halfway home, more than halfway home. And at least in the doing of it, the asking of those questions, if you do it right, if it's not just one person in their office, if it's a collective, agreeing that that's the way forward, just in the act of co-creating that future together, you galvanize a team, you create that esprit de corps, you bring people together.
I know that co-creation is something you've always been very passionate about, and I think it sort of is one of the features of Legacy. And everything I've read about, the All Blacks has been that sort of ability to co-create and to sort of set the leadership team on the pitch who are taking responsibility, and sort of almost the management step back a couple of days days before game day and allow the leadership team on the pitch to do that. Tell us a little bit about that and how you're seeing people in this time. Look, you've been working with people all the way through and helping them with their strategies and such. Like, where have you seen real skill around that being executed at the moment?
I'll come back to that specific thing. There's a phrase in special forces, loyal dissent. Loyal dissent. You want people asking questions of you as a leader. You want to create that environment fundamentally around yourself, that those conversations happen and an issue is looked at from every angle. Wayne Smith, the former All Black coach, has a great line where he says, people will rise to a challenge if it's their challenge. Similar but different. How do you create an environment in which everybody got their fingerprints on it, they're contributing to it? Because, we die for our own ideas. We will represent our own ideas if we see them in action. That's human nature. We're much more determined and much more committed if it was kind of, we feel a sense of ownership. So where I see it working really, really strongly is the kind of leader, the kind of, Jim Collins called them the level 5 leader, who are creating something bigger than themselves. And that comes around purpose often. That becomes around very purposeful organizations. They go, well, we're going to go out there and we're going to do something together. So I think partly it's about setting the narrative, those who set the narrative really well. And the second part of it is, how do you create an environment in which, of sort of psychological safety, that it's possible for people to speak into and feel they have a meaningful role? And there's a certain degree of emotional intelligence from leaders that requires. But there's also some structures. So in the military, there's a process, a doctrine called mission command, and we've spoken about it in the past. And mission command came from when Napoleon beat the Prussians and ended the Prussian Empire, and the Prussians became the Germans, and the Germans went, we need to sort this. And they started a military academy, and Clausewitz was involved, and a guy called von Moltke was the architect of a leadership way of thinking called mission command, or has been translated as mission command. And it's very simple. It goes, you select, or the key principles, you select the right people, you train them right, you make sure that they're capable, you resource them right, you make sure they got the capacity, then you instruct them in the right way, what the Americans call the commander's intent. You create the glowing future, the idea that everyone's chasing, the purpose that we're looking towards, and then incredibly importantly, you get the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
You know, you as leaders, you're in charge of the what and the why, but you let your people figure out the how, and that's really the key. That's really the key. And then they talk about what they call a directed telescope. You look in at moments, but you don't micromanage.
Yeah.
And so it's empowerment. And empowerment in business has a pretty bad reputation and absolutely no methodology. You know, people talk about, I'm going to empower my people. Well, how? Yeah. Exactly. Well, Mission Command provides some sort of structural clue for the ability to do that. On an interpersonal level, I think it's very simple. Ask questions, don't tell, ask. What do you guys reckon? What should we do about this? How are we going to approach it? Because then you're throwing the onus of responsibility and therefore leadership onto your people. If you do that in a way they'll own it, you'll have much better ideas, because more heads are better than one. Yeah. You'll have a collective sense of ownership and responsibility towards it. And also, and most importantly, when people are asked questions, they have to process it. It has to come through them. They're not just being told through one ear and out the other. They have to think about it and come up with an answer. And in the process psychologically of doing that, it sticks. Yeah. And then they feel that contribution. So I think there's a macro level structural thing, create the environment around for that kind of loyal dissent, if you like. Yeah. Asking questions, that, you know, have your people in charge of the how, you work out the what and the why. And then on an interpersonal level, you know, create an engaged conversation through using what I call leading questions. You know the answer often, or at least the general direction, but have someone else come up with a solution.
I think this is a really interesting point because of the time as much as anything else. Look, right now we're in this period where there's a lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety and stress, as you mentioned before, around people. And I think people it's very easy for people to abdicate that responsibility. So for people in a business to just look up and await instruction. It's stuff which a lot of people have never been through before. It's stuff which people are confused about, concerned about. And I think it's become so important to make sure that this isn't just a reversion to, right, here's the plan, follow it, and this is what you've got to do. It is a constant consultation all the way through this, isn't it?
And in fact, even more important now, because the level of potential disengagement is so high. Yeah. You know, if I shifted the camera angle of this, you know, it'd reveal projects that I need to get on with. You know, I have a son still at home, and I'm thinking right now, will he walk in the door? You know, I think actually no one's looking over me. I could go off and exercise and take my time about it. You know, there are a lot of distractions, and screens. A cold, you know, Marshall McLuhan called a cold medium. It's a disengaging medium fundamentally, and so as leaders trying to create that kind of connection and cohesion and common cause, there's a lot that conspires against us. So I think we have to work twice as hard. You know, culture really is created in a number of ways, but really two buckets. One is proximity. We spend time together. You know, we genuinely connect and we have a drink together, or we bump into each other in a corridor and swap a few ideas. And we feel that we're together, the oxytocin rubs off, or whatever it is, you know, that happens as social beings, we connect. Now, in the absence of that, the only thing you've really got is story. What's the story here? What are we doing together? Why does it matter? What do we stand for? You know, what are we asking of each other? All of those things. And so, you know, the leaders, to answer your question from before, the leaders that I think are really killing it at the moment are the ones who are really using technology to generate really rich conversations that are beyond just purely the executional. you know, that and that also provides a huge amount of solace for people.
So we have got a interesting little segue here with look, we're talking about the importance of resilience at the moment. We've got a lack of resilience in some of the internet technology. So we've got a new vista for you, James. We are repositioning ourselves up in bedroom 1.
Bedroom 1. Sorry, so sorry about that. So, you know, I think I don't know how much got captured on tape, but we were talking about, you know, the practical issues, the disengagement that a socially distanced world can create, and some of that's going to be technological issues. You know, dropping out of broadband, of Wi-Fi for reasons as yet unknown. But you know, it could be kids wandering in off you know, into the room, which could happen at any moment. All of the distractions that surround us, and
specifically Indonesian rice effigies.
Indonesian rice effigies, exactly. You know, I think there's some very real world human challenges that make individuals vulnerable and more stressed on one level, and on the other level disengaged, because, you know, we're speaking to a screen. Often we're not necessarily spending that time together, and I'm not sure what was captured in our previous conversation, part of this conversation, but you know, cultures form in two ways, either through the proximity, through being together, bumping into each other, you know, having a drink on a Friday night, what did you do on the weekend, all of that sort of stuff. And in the absence of that, what have you got? You've got people, you know, out on the road or in their homes or even in the offices, socially distanced. So all of that social connection that's incredibly important drops like an internet connection, you know. And so the challenge is, even the onus and the responsibility for leaders is to really almost amp it up. There's a great line in public speaking: be yourself plus 20%. And I think at the moment it's kind of be your leadership self plus 20%. You know, it requires a step up into really engaging with the individual, really being human in terms of understanding that internet goes down, kids may wander in, and being very, you know, active, proactive about creating human connection. And that comes down to sort of storytelling in many ways, framing the story. Reaching out and connecting, understanding where your listeners are, asking questions, all of that co-creation stuff I think we covered previously becomes even more important. That emotionally astute and emotionally connected leadership is incredibly important in a disconnected time. And at the same time, it's also a very anxiety-provoking time. You know, people are downsizing, which is a euphemism for blood on the streets. You know, people are going, what's my future? The future that I thought, the bonus I thought I was going to get, that car I was going to buy, the offer we just put on a house. You know, my mother is old. My father has got asthma. You know, all of these things are very real for people at the moment. And then the media is making, you know, a song and a dance about everything. Meanwhile, there's riots in the street, you know, talks of recession. It's a difficult time in life for many, many people. You know, a lot of people heading towards retirement are now going, I'm unable to afford to retire. You know, people coming, university students who are passing out, it's their big moment that's been taken away from them. And now they're going, I've got no network, I've got no job, the future I thought I was going to have is going to be very different. So at every level of our kind of working society, of our society per se, there's anxiety and there's a need for human connection, there's a need for care, there's a need for support, there's a need for leadership. And I think that business leaders that can provide social leadership and interpersonal leadership, you know, it's almost an anthropological responsibility, A, social responsibility. B, it's a huge opportunity because by creating loyalty, connection, a sense of purpose, and a sense of meaning, you benefit the people you're bringing into your orbit, but you're also benefiting your organization. You know, people need leadership, and they need direction, they need values, they need purpose, they need a sense of where they're going. And that in itself builds a huge amount of resilience. Just on a personal resilience level, you know, I think it's very easy to forget about the self-care aspect. You know, now is a time you either exercise or, you know, I think there's been a time that we've gone in two different directions. We've either exercised more than we ever have, or we've drunk more than we ever have. Some of us have done both. You know, but there's a choice here with unstructured time, a relatively unstructured time when it's been up to us, about the kind of the habits that we form, and whether those habits are healthy habits or not healthy habits. And you know, I think one of the benefits of this time of reevaluation is that it's given us much more time individually, and that can be problematic. You know, there's more alcoholism in the world in professions with unstructured time, door-to-door salesmen, you know, people out, Mondeo man and all of that, out on the street doing stuff. They have no oversight, they tend to drink more, etc., etc. So there are dangers around this time, and I think setting good habits, coming back to the moment, all of the kind of the on the hippie scale of the recruitment spectrum, if you like, you know, around mindfulness, self-care, compassion, you know, love, you know, all of those things have become much more important, I think, now, because that creates a real sense of community and connection, solidity and meaning for people. And I think, without getting kind of too fluffy about it, they're incredibly important aspects to be thinking about, I think, as leaders at the moment. We have a responsibility to our people.
I think there's probably circa 50 people I've you know, spoken to over recent weeks who are running and leading businesses, and I think some people have done absolutely stunning work around that. And there's a couple that really sort of stand out in my eye, and it's that connection and that importance and that sort of real focus on the team that I think has been, you know, sort of prevalent in those who've really nailed it and got it right. And when you're looking at what you're talking there with resilience, engagement is probably the key word. And to get, you know, that engagement and that consistency of and when I talk about engagement, you know, in the brand, but also the consistency of energy that's required with so many people hitting the wall at various different stages and so many different emotions, as you're talking about. It is so important to keep that connection, so important to be part of something bigger, I think, as well.
And you know, it comes down, I think, to individual purpose, leadership purpose. You know, what is the role of the leader? Well, the role of the leader, you can say, is to hit those quarterly returns or whatever it is. But you might go, the role of the leader is to grow the capacity and the capability and the confidence of the people who I lead. You know, to create a growth environment around yourself, in which case I kind of call that the coach CEO. You take some sort of coaching framework and you apply it to a leadership practice, and you think, well, what does a coach do in a team? A coach pulls that team together almost physically. You know, the great coaches are highly tactile human beings. They bear hug. You look at Jurgen Klopp or somebody, he's physically pulling that team together. He pulls them all together. Humor, you know, a sense of humor, a sense of us versus them, a kind of the psychology of the crowd. All of that stuff is incredibly important anyway. If you want to get great performance out of people. Now, you know, it's a service to your community, and as leaders, our community, our fundamental community, are the people around us. And as you say, I think they're going to be the people doing sterling work on this now will be rewarded in kind later on. They'll be rewarded, you know, cynically with performance now. But just in terms of, you know, you attract and retain talent that way by being a great place to work. You do build loyalty. You know, the loyalty is conditional on salary and other offers and all of that always. But you do build loyalty, and you build a sort of a sense of you know, we've talked a lot in the past about esprit de corps, the spirit of the body, that indefinable thing. And, you know, we talked about Napoleon before. He said that the moral to the physical is as 3 to 1. The spirit is a force multiplier to your kind of your asset, your human asset, if you like. And so if you can create that spirit, and as a leader be the creator of that spirit, you will be rewarded in many, many ways. Not least of all, actually, is personal meaning and personal satisfaction. You know,
I think that sort of piece is so important, isn't it? To just sort of try and tie that all together. And the esprit de corps is something that's really interesting, because look, it's you're in a situation where there is stress, and as you say, people's natural reaction to that is to grab and to do all that sort of thing, and to keep that sort of sense of, you know, the whole in one team and esprit de corps and everything you sort of put around that becomes so important to manage as well, and to recognize and to understand that it's walking in people's shoes. I want to finish, James, on your next project, because I think it's going to be equally as fascinating. And next time, you know, we speak, I may not be wearing an All Blacks jersey. I may be wearing a full Gurkha outfit. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, and some of the things about
well,
how that translates too.
Thanks for asking that, and I think there are a lot of themes around it. The short long story is that I ended up doing something at Sandhurst, at the military academy, and I was at the launch of what was called the Leadership Code. And the Leadership Code is, there you go. The stand up straight and make your bed and shine your shoes. Interestingly, Sandhurst's motto is, you know, serve to lead, which illustrates what we just talked about then. But there was a launch of a thing called the Leadership Code, which was an ethos of leadership distributed throughout the kind of NCO ranks of the British Army. And to illustrate aspects of leadership, they had various leaders from within the army stand up and tell a small story about what happened. And one bloke got up, Andrew Todd, who was one of the leaders of a Gurkha expedition to Everest, to put a serving Gurkha on the summit of Everest. Never happened before. It was the 200th anniversary of the Gurkhas being part of the British Army. And of course, it was in 2015, and on April the 25th at 11:56 of that year, and a massive 7.8, I think it was, earthquake struck Nepal. An avalanche came down off Pamori, off one of the sisters, or the daughter of Everest, it's called, and killed. The numbers have never really been finalized, 22 or so people in base camp. It was the worst day in Everest history. The Gurkhas had a man in base camp. He was caught up by it. He survived. And a couple of other Sherpas who were working for them. They had men on the icefall, the Khumbu icefall, which is pretty much the worst place to be in an avalanche and any sort of disaster. And about a dozen people who were trapped up in Camp 1. And I thought, what an extraordinary story. And they were planning to come back in 2017. What an extraordinary. But then, of course, I realized that it was 10,000 people died in that moment or shortly afterwards in Nepal. You know, 3.5 million people slept outside that night. 40,000 schools were wiped out. It was a massive national disaster. And in the rebuilding of that team and going back to Everest, I saw a massive story about how does a culture get back on its feet? Yeah. How do individuals overcome massive adversity? How do you get back to the top, if you take the metaphor? And so it's become a narrative nonfiction book about that moment, which, you know, they say bite off more than you can chew and then chew like hell. So I've been chewing like hell for quite a few years now, and it's getting there. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, one of the things that's that's remarkable is the move towards, and again, I'm going to sound sort of like a fluffy old hippie, but is the move towards love. Yeah. And when everything else is stripped away, you know, when you've lost your home and members of your family and your livelihood and all of that, the stuff that remains, all that remains is what really matters. And that tends to be human connection. That tends to be love. So just a quick story to illustrate it, because I know we need to wrap up, but a quick story to illustrate it. There was a man I interviewed. He lost his house, a 2-bedroom shack, really, in one of the poorer parts of Kathmandu. And a tower, a landmark, fell on top of it. It ruined, took his house out. He had the papers were bulldozed up. He lost everything. He slept outside for 4 months. Previously, he had sold T-shirts on the street. He managed to borrow some money at terrible rates and rebuild the house by hand with some friends, and he did most of the labor, most of the work. And he built this little 2-bedroom house. And the only difference that he built it exactly the same, except at the front he built a slot so that he could have his shop there. He could sell his T-shirts out of his house, so he never had to be away from his family again. Mm. And I think one of the things that illustrates to me is one, in this period of reevaluation we've been through, I think probably the universal thing is it's kind of be close and create connection with the people you love. That's been one of the things. One of the things we've missed most about going into work is the connection that we feel with the people we work with. One of the things that guides our behaviors when we get it right is moving towards a more compassionate, a more passionate, and more purposeful kind of way of being in this world. And good things tend to happen when you do that. So, that's the kind of the thrust of that story, but there's a lot around resilience, overcoming adversity, and also don't take anything for granted. Yeah. Things can change and have changed for everyone just like that. So seize the moment. As the All Blacks say, this is your time, this is your moment. You might get a knock on the knee next week and never be an All Black again. Put it all out on the field. Do what you're going to do now. Make it happen now, because tomorrow, who knows? Yesterday is gone, and tomorrow, who knows? Yeah. So, a philosophical end to a fascinating conversation, but hopefully it gives some sort of just some things to think about for people listening, in terms of how they might create the kind of connection and cohesion and common cause and esprit de corps of their team and for themselves to kind of survive and thrive in what are challenging times.
Do you know what? I'm going to join you on the hippie trip with this, because I think it's something I'm massively passionate about. Look, when I first got into work, I never wanted just to go to work. I never wanted to do what my dad did, which was go to work every single day and have to go to work for 40 years and endure it and live for the weekend. I've always wanted to have a bunch of people around me and work with people who I love working with, who I work for, and who we work together. And I think that story is just beautiful about how we can sort of bring that sort of connection together. And I think that's what culture is to me, sort of having a bunch of people there who you really want to who you want to do well for each other, and you want to succeed, everyone with it, within that business, and you love being around them. And I think if we can come out of this with businesses who've got that same sort of stuff, and I see it in companies there that really play together and really enjoy it, and they aren't just coming into work, then I think that's going to be a great thing. So James, thank you as always for your wonderful storytelling, for making sense of it all, and for giving us an opportunity. For people there who are keen to get in touch with you and to hear a little bit more, I know you're doing great things to help businesses at the moment. What's the best way of doing that?
Google, just a quick Google will usually find me. LinkedIn. The book is called Legacy. My email is in that.
Available at all good stores and online
and
outlets.
Amazon as well. But I'm on LinkedIn, James at fablepartners.com. But there are a lot of different ways of finding me. But I'd love to hear from you, and maybe I can help. But it's been a pleasure, Toby, as always. I look forward to catching up again.
Likewise, my friend. Likewise, it's an absolute pleasure. And look, for anyone who's watching there, I can highly recommend it. James will help you make sense of it all, and has been absolutely revolutionary to our purpose, our values, our mission. And I can't ever thank you enough for everything you've always done for us as well, mate. So thank you all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.